Well, hello again and welcome to Persuasive Techniques for this month. Persuasive speaking, as you know, is powerful and influential speaking, and you are trying to create and reinforce attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors in your audience so they take action on your project. So you want them to adopt your point of view and take action, and we're going to talk about exactly how you do that effectively in a presentation. Here are some of the persuasive elements I'm going to talk about in this presentation. The first one is different types of appeals. There are 3 types of appeals that I'm going to go through, and I'll explain which one is the most powerful of all. Next, we're going to talk about analyzing your audience. You're doing some of that in your projects, but I'm going to talk about it from a specific presentation point of view. That's going to be followed by how do we keep our audience's attention so that they retain and remember information. And finally, we're going to talk about the power of language and some speech devices you can use that actually makes your speech and your points memorable for your audience. So let's get started. But before we do that, I want to just talk about one thing that underlies all of this, and that's passion. Passion for your subject. Unless you as a group are truly passionate about your project, you're not going to be able to convince your audience to adopt your point of view and support your project. Audiences know when speakers are not being authentic. So your job in a persuasive speech is to get that passion across your sincere conviction that what project you're proposing is absolutely the right thing to do. Why is that so critical? Because when you have passion about your project, it's going to show in your voice, it's going to show in your gestures, it's going to show in your facial expressions. And even if you've got people in your audience that maybe have decided they don't really, from the beginning, I'm not so keen on this project, or what I understand about it, they're actually going to listen to you if they think you're sincere, that you've understood the problem, and you really want to help. And that's going to come from your passion. So remember that's got to underlie everything that you and your group do in your presentations. Okay, as I mentioned, there are 3 types of persuasive appeals, and I'm going to talk about each one of these in detail. The first one is credibility. How do you establish your group's credibility on the project you're talking about? The second one is logic. What are the facts and figures that go behind your project? And the third one, and actually the most important one when it comes to persuasion, is emotion. So let's go through each one of these individually. Credibility. Credibility actually is woven through the logic and the emotion, and credibility is what you're working on right now in building your projects. You are establishing that you know what you're talking about. You're establishing through all the fact finding and all the research and all the needs assessment that you're doing that you have done your homework and that you know what you're talking about. So that's going to establish credibility right away with your audience. One of the ways you can do that is, as you know, knowing both sides of the argument. So even if you are presenting your solution in your project, you want to assure your audience that you've done your research and that you know what the options are, the alternative options, and here's why your idea is the best possible choice. And again, I know you're working on this, but I just want to couch this in terms of persuasion. And the third thing is, and you're doing these things, your needs assessment, citing expert opinion, showing results of tests and surveys, these are all the things that help build credibility for your project. And it's actually quite tied to the next appeal, which is logic. So logic, obviously, is how you're basing your arguments on facts and appealing to your audience's ability to reason. It's extremely difficult to argue with sound logic until emotion takes over. And again, that's why emotion is important. But there are 2 ways to use a logical appeal effectively. All the work you're doing right now in terms of your needs assessment, explaining your facts, explaining your research, explaining your figures, is building this beautiful foundation. You're putting all the bricks in place to build a solid and beautiful foundation upon which you can appeal to your audience's support for your project. So you're going to use those facts to provide that foundation. Also, as you know, you're using examples to support your argument. Now, here's an important point I'd like to make here. You might have a project that's never been done in Afghanistan, or it might have been done in other provinces or other locations in Afghanistan, but not where you are. It's okay to use those examples. And actually, they build on your logical argument, because you can say, we may not have done it here or in our organization, but here's how it's worked elsewhere. And I know, again, that you're working on all of these things as you build your project. So credibility and logic are, I think, the things you're focused on the most. Let's talk about now, as I said, the third and most important thing, which is emotion. Emotion is the third element of persuasion, and also the most important, because interestingly enough, if you look at research on brain science and how humans make decisions, the fact of the matter is we all make decisions emotionally first, and then we back up our decision by citing the logic and the research that we've done. And it doesn't matter where you come from, it doesn't matter what your culture is, every human being makes decisions emotionally first. We may not be aware of this because we are using facts and figures to back up our decision, but I can guarantee you, especially in a persuasive presentation, emotion is the first, foremost, most critical thing in the art of persuasion. One really great way to do that in your presentation is through using visuals. I don't know, you may have noticed, I hope you have, that most of the visuals in my presentation are from Afghanistan. I made that decision quite consciously because I knew that that was going to be relatable to you as my audience. We've got a saying in English that a picture is worth 1,000 words. And what that means is I can explain something to you for hours, but if I show you a picture, you're going to get that feeling, that sense of the story right away. So if I look at this picture, I know there's a story behind this of friends out for a nice day, you know, loving being together, but you show me the picture, and as I tell the story, it becomes more powerful because there it is. It's a direct experience. That's why telling your own story, if possible, is going to be the most powerful persuasive appeal you can use with your audience. So when you've chosen your project, and I know you have, not all of you are going to be related to that project because you may come from a different organization. So the person for whom that project is going to be directly relatable in your group, so the person whose project you've chosen, is probably the best person to tell a story. Now, it's best if it's your own story, but if it's somebody else's story, but it's related to what you're talking about and you've got some great visuals, that's going to work too. So again, try and tell a story. It doesn't have to be a long story, but human beings love stories because they're all about emotions and they can relate to things like that have happened in their lives. Your whole goal is to connect with your audience. And the best way to connect with your audience is to remember this acronym, WIFM, what's in it for me. No matter what you're talking about, no matter what your facts and figures are, if you can, all the way through your presentation, continue to come back to what's in it for them. So put yourself in their shoes, I'm in the audience, and always be able to answer the question, what's in it for me? And those are three powerful ways that you're going to reach people's emotion and convince them to support your project. Let's talk really briefly about analyzing your audience. I know you've been talking about that a little bit, but specifically from a presentation point of view, find out who they are. It's not enough to go, oh, it's going to be the senior executives from USAID. Who are they? What departments do they come from? How long have they worked there? What's their experience level? What's their expertise in the topic you're talking about? What are they interested in? Answer all those questions. Get to know, through a little bit of research, who are the actual people in your audience. So again, if you look this group of school children, I'm going to talk to them quite differently than, you know, talking to senior executives from USAID. Also, ask yourself, what do they know, what do they expect, and what do they feel about our topic? Do they already know some things about it? Do they know the common jargon and the regular terminology that people use? And what do they feel? Are they interested in this topic? Do you think they might be biased against this topic? Do they see you as credible? So find out as much as you can about your audience and relate to that way. Still on analyzing our audience, look at this group of boys. This is what you want your audience to do at the end. You want them giving you a thumbs up to your project. So thinking more about analyzing your audience, this isn't so much what you're going to present, but what do you want them to do? So whenever you're crafting a new slide or a new element of your presentation, ask yourself as a group, what do we want the audience to do at the end? Finish this sentence. By the end of our presentation, our audience will, and then fill in the blank. They will approve funding. They will approve implementation. They will take this to the next level. What is it you want them to do? And let that govern everything you decide on in your presentation. Okay, so now you've got an audience in front of you. You have got to be able to keep their attention, and you've got to get them to retain information. How do you do that most effectively in a persuasive presentation? You can highlight information through doing one of two things, repetition or flagging. People remember what gets repeated. Perhaps you have a catchy statement or a slogan you want the audience to remember. Make sure you keep repeating that in your speech. So I'm going to come back to WIFM. Remember what's in it for them. And I'm probably going to say that one more time before I end this presentation. And that's the power of repetition. You will walk away from here knowing about WIFM if you didn't know about it before. The second thing you can do is something called flagging, and this is the most direct way to draw attention to something you want the audience to remember. You just tell them, and you can flag something by saying, if you remember one thing from this speech, please remember WIFM. And then they know that's the one thing, and then the more you repeat it, the more they'll remember it. Or you could say something like, okay, here is the most important point of our speech. Make sure it is the most important part of your speech. But you can introduce it by saying that, or you could say, okay, this next thing is critical to remember. Another thing you can do to keep people's attention is do something unexpected. Alter the volume of your speech. Make it higher like this, make it lower. That builds drama. You can shake up the audience a bit and get their attention back if they're starting to wander. You can tell a short story. You can do something dramatic like throw a report on the floor and saying this is done as no good, this is why our project's going to work. You can even move to another part of the room, and that gets people's attention moving. Because as soon as you move to another part of the room, people who might be getting a little tired in the audience will perk up and go, uh-oh, something new is happening. The last thing I want to talk to you about persuasive speeches today is powerful language and speech devices. How can you just ramp up your language just a little bit more to be more powerfully persuasive? Really simple thing to do is write how you speak when you're preparing your notes for your presentation, pretending you're having a coffee with a friend and you're having a conversation across the coffee table about your project. In other words, you're being conversation. Pretend you're having a conversation with the audience. It's more relaxing and it feels much more natural than some, person speaking stiffly. You want to use short words, short sentences, and paragraphs. Resist the tendency to try to impress people with big words. This is not an academic paper you're writing. You don't need the big words. People respond in a speech much more readily to short words because they can remember them. Also, short sentences and paragraphs mean that you're giving simple ideas that are easier to remember. The longer the sentence, the longer the paragraphs you're writing that you're going to speak, the more complicated it gets for people to listen. Be specific. Language can be very complicated, especially if it's your second language, and some words can have multiple meanings. I'm going to give you a really quick example from English. The word evening and the word night are very, very similar in meaning, and most of the time you could use them interchangeably. However, if I'm talking to you about a woman who entered the room in a beautiful evening dress, that would be like a ball gown, a formal dress that you're wearing out for a dinner or an event. It's very different than I say the woman entered the room in a beautiful night dress. Night dress in English means I'm ready to go to bed. These are like my pajamas, right? So a night dress and an evening dress, two different things. Be specific in your language, and the mentors and the coaches will help you with this. And again, I'll help you with this too when we see your presentations. Be descriptive as possible with your words. Attempt to appeal to your audience's every sense. So if you look at the picture on the screen here, you got, let's say you took your son out flying a kite on Friday afternoon. Talk about the wind was blowing, but it was warm and it was fresh and it smelled of spring and the birds were singing. You see how I'm talking about all the sentences, or excuse me, all the senses, and the view was beautiful. So be as descriptive as possible in the words that you use. All right, using our PowerPoint rules, let's talk about where we went today. We talked about using different types of appeals: credibility, logic, and emotion. We talked about how to analyze your audience. What do they know about your topic? What do they feel? What do they expect? We talked about how to retain audience's attention and retention, doing something unexpected, using repetition, using flagging. And finally, we talked about the power of language. Write how you speak. Be conversational. Use short, memorable words, sentences, and paragraphs. Be specific in your language and be as descriptive as possible. Look forward to connecting with you next month when we're going to talk about body language and vocal variety. Have a great month.